Concluding the Troublesome Engines saga is Percy Runs Away, the 17th episode of the first series, based on the story of the same name from the Railway series book Troublesome Engines. This episode was when we got to see a bit of Percy's personality shine through, compared to the previous episode where we just introduced him. After several days of being shut up in the shed for going on strike, the Fat Controller visits Gordon, James and Henry. He tells the three that he hopes that they are sorry and have learned that they are not as important as they thought. He informs them of the hard work Percy, Thomas and Edward have been doing in their absence. However, he is willing to let them out and return to work on the condition that they be good and do not complain about shunting anymore. All three agree and they quickly resume their duties. The Fat Controller then speaks to Thomas, Edward and Percy, and as a reward for their hard work, allows them to play on the branch line for a few days. Thomas happily collects Annie and Clarabelle while Edward and Percy go and play with trucks in the yard. Edward and Thomas leave and Percy is left alone where he enjoys watching the larger engines go by. He also enjoys being cheeky to them, which makes them very cross. Later, after doing some more shunting, Percy heads back to the yard, but the points are against him. Percy is so eager to work, he carelessly forgets that Edward told him to whistle when he got to the signal box so that the Cinnamon would know he was there. Suddenly, he sees something that does make him whistle. Gordon on the same line heading towards him at full speed with the express. Percy is horrified, but cannot do anything and closes his eyes as Gordon gets closer. Luckily, Gordon applies his brakes and stops just in time. However, by now a frightened Percy has begun to move and intending to run away begins running backwards. Percy runs straight through Edward's station and is so frightened he runs straight up Gordon's hill without stopping. After he descends the hill, Percy quickly becomes tired but is unable to stop because his crew had jumped out when they saw Gordon. Luckily, a Cinnamon sees that Percy is in trouble and sets the points onto a siding, where Percy finally stops in a big bank of soil. By now Percy is so tired that he does not care where he stops. He is dug out of the soil by some workmen, who offer him some coal and a drink to make him feel better. Gordon arrives and congratulates Percy on starting quickly and stopping a potential accident. Percy apologises for his previous cheekiness and Gordon pulls him out of the bank. Now friends with Gordon, Percy quickly settles into his new role as station pilot. Although he never loses his cheekiness since he's that sort of engine, he now knows to always be careful when he goes on the main line. As I said, this episode was the conclusion to the Troublesome Engines saga, and it did a really great job at concluding that story. And you could say it's almost two stories in one, where we got to see the end of the Troublesome Engines saga, and we got to see a full glimpse of Percy's personality. Just how much he could be cheeky to other engines, especially those bigger than him. And this episode was the first time we had an actual scary suspenseful scene in the series. And that being when Gordon rushes down the main line towards Percy. And for those fans that never read the book before this episode, this was really suspenseful because we had no idea what was going to happen. Was Gordon going to stop in time? Was Percy going to run away in time? Or was there going to be a huge crash? At the time we didn't know this, so this was pretty suspenseful back then. And Ringo Starr yelling Gordon's "get out of my way" was just brilliant. It was one of those times in the first series where we got to hear him put a lot of energy into his voice. And it really pays off. And Michael Donald Jr. Campbell's Runaway theme really does help with the suspensefulness of the scene. Speaking of which, this was the first time we got to hear the full version of the Runaway theme, which has since this episode become one of the most iconic and popular themes of the TV series. It was so good in fact that they did a new version of it for The Adventure Begins. Percy Runs Away is another one of those episodes that I used to re-quote and reenact a lot when I was a kid, partly because it was part of the Troublesome Engines saga, and it was the first time we got to see an engine run away on his own. This is another one of those episodes that I highly recommend checking out if you haven't seen it already. It's one of the most popular and iconic episodes that's gotten tons of re-releases on VHS and DVD, and it's an episode that we can really be entertained with from the runaway, Percy's personality, and all the other things I've mentioned. But if you're going to watch this episode, I'd recommend watching Tenders and Turntables and Trouble in the Shed first so you can get the full idea of the full story. But I guarantee you'll have a good time watching this episode.